those of you who got an invite, welcome to Nerd Prom.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With the hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents.
We want to take you on a quest for knowledge. One that will take us from ancient medieval fantasy across the far reaches of space to the distant future. To many savage worlds.
Welcome to the Wild Eye Podcast, episode 53. And this is a podcast dedicated to pinnacle entertainment savage worlds aimed at beginners and veterans alike. What's going on there, sweet Lamaroo, with your armpits hanging out? That's pretty sexy times. Uh-oh, I made a ding and I don't think I should have. What's happening? What are we doing today? You're looking spelled away. Sorry, Harrison. You said say it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. No Sleeves McGee here with, of course, Gary. Want some beats? Harrison Hunt.
What's up?
Manuel Sams, and returning once again, Paris Conte, aka Pure Mongrel.
Boo.
Yeah, we got.
G'day, how are you?
Yeah, we got a good show today. Setting roles. Yeah, people probably heard me talk about setting rules on the show. I'm very opinionated about the setting rules, so we're going to talk about that. But before, let's share a little bit of feedback, some emails we got from our listeners.
Well, the first one we got in, usually we get a lot of hate mail. I mean, a lot. We actually got so much that we crashed Gmail. But we actually got a nice one for once, and it comes in from Shannon Ninja, which I think is correct. And she says, I love your podcast. The way you are so diverse but complement each other is amazing. There are times when I laugh myself nearly to tears while also learning about Savage Worlds. Also, I'm from Central US. Hearing global accents is awesome too. Up to finding the show, I've been trying to decide on a game to play with a group of new gamers without previous gaming backgrounds and the baggage that could have come with that. They have taken to trappings, mechanics and storytelling like champs. I'm the one that needed adjustment, having played a wide variety of more traditional games since the late 80s. Your advice has helped me with this new system and given me considerable amounts of new game mastering ideas. You guys rock and keep up the fantastic job. Thank you very much, Shannon. I don't know what they're smoking, but give me a slice. But no.
By the way, Shannon could be a male name too.
Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So, whatever you are, we love you very much.
Yeah, we're not judging. Fun fact: the last name could be is probably from German descent. That is in German that would be pronounced Leininger.
Yeah, but if you say it Line Ninja, it's got ninja in it.
Yeah, I like
fair point. Yeah, fair point. That wins.
Anyway, either way, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I know it's a bit bad reading out positive feedback on this show, but you know we get a lot of hate, and it's just nice to know that we're appreciated for once. Take that, Dad. But the next one comes in from Byron Howie Jr. And Byron is a male name, but she says, hello, Wild Die crew. I just found the Wild Die podcast, and I'm fairly new to Savage World. Just a single one. Was introduced about 3 years ago when a friend of mine and gaming pal created a few short sessions of G.I. Joe from the 80s comics and animation and gave us setting rules for character building, and we had a blast every other Friday for 4 months, which prompted me to start looking into the SW game, and I've added it to my gaming library. I've played RPG starting in 82, so I've played 30 plus systems and have really enjoyed this system. Right now we are playing round robin GMing Savage Rifts, and I'm going to do the same with Deadlands PP books. So one question. While in the heat of the game, what is the best way to remember to hand out bennies? Thank you for the show and savage on. And that comes from Byron.
Well, the answer to that one is really, really easy. You just use the setting rule Joker's Wild.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Because that's a problem I have. I tend to forget to hand out bennies unless people actually remind me. So in pretty much every game I run, I use the setting rule Joker's Wild. And I try to use decks with more than 2 Jokers. So that compensates for me forgetting to hand out bennies when it's not an action scene. And it makes combat super interesting because there's just so much over-the-top action going on with 4 Jokers in the deck.
Yeah, and Joker's Wild is a setting rule in the book. So basically, every time a Joker is drawn in combat, everybody actually gets a Benny. So that works if you have a combat-heavy game, especially. But what about, when it's just a bit of role play or dramatic task or other types? What do you do, Gary?
I like to give out bennies when they say nice things about me. Like, you're looking rather swell today, Mr. Want Some Beats. Or, that's a nice shirt you have on. Or...
But you don't wear a shirt most of the time, so you're lying.
Harrison, simmer down. Most of the time, I play with kids, 15, 16, my son and his buddies, and they're like little baby birds just chirping at the Benny pile. So I'm like mama bird with the. This is really actually probably a very bad analogy, so we're gonna skip it. But the kids always have their hands out. Let's instead of saying the baby bird analogy, because I just realized that might have some bad connotations.
Yeah, I was just imagining you chewing them up, and yeah.
Yeah. All right, so yeah, let's go with the kids at the door. Like when you send them off to school, they all got their hands out for $5 for lunch money. That's my deal. Also, that you should be handing out bennies when hindrances come into play and work negatively towards somebody. So that's I kind of try and pay attention to that. If you're going to use a hindrance in a way that affects you negatively, you're going to get a benny for that as well. And then I just like to throw them really hard at people. That's another thing too. That's fun. Just whip them at people. Whip them. You got to do that, right? Slingshot? That's how do you hand out your bennies? With a slingshot.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to forget to do it then, because then you're always going to have fun slingshotting people. I tend to do it whenever I feel something dramatically appropriate has happened, and I always use Joker's Wild, as Manuel has said. But I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I always forget to do it. I'm so terrible at remembering. But recently we've been playing in Solomon Kane, and my friends at the table, they've been, whenever they do something, as I said, dramatically appropriate, or I use the Gary's method whenever they do a hindrance or act upon a hindrance, which, kind of obviously hinders them in some way, then I'll give them a Benny. But it has to be significant and it has to be in keeping with their character. And that's about it. Or I just I chew them up and
something real.
Sorry.
Yeah, so a very interesting idea there.
Well, the one of the main reasons I use Savage Worlds in my work with young people is because of the bennies. Bennies are a great way of influencing. How do I explain it? So if I'm trying to promote a positive action or a positive experience, then I start awarding bennies. If something negative happens, then you take the bennies away. So it's kind of a Pavlov situation without. Yeah, that sounds a bit odd when you put it that way, but it does help reinforce good behaviour versus negative behaviour. But really, when I hand them out the most is whenever the players do something that makes my job easier. So if they add something that helps drive the story along or makes it interesting, as well as playing on the hindrances, anytime they do something that helps drive the story or gives character to the story, I'm just throwing those bennies out.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to play with kids and not with like inmates I just imagine that you're in jail, you know, taking your
cigarettes.
Yeah, but as soon as you go to take one away, like one of them just runs a knife, you know, shanks you right through the hand.
No, it's nothing quite like that. But look, I get players that are really shy or really new to role playing, and so bennies are a way of coaxing them in. They see that they get a reward for their input, which helps a lot. I even use bennies for that kid that doesn't want to role play at all. He just gets to use or control the Benny monster and hand out the bennies and is in charge of that. I'll even get players to nominate another player for a Benny. That happens quite a bit on my tables if someone thinks that that's really, really good, that something that they've done. And then we'll discuss it as a group. And if we're all in agreement, or I think it's good, we'll hand them a Benny. But the Benny economy is quite free-flowing at my table, so it's not something I tend to forget.
Well, what I was thinking about is actually, you just mentioned it, the Benny monster. How does that work? In case, you know, Byron probably just started listening and now he wants to, you know, maybe he wants to use it. Maybe everybody wants a Benny monster. So what is it?
Everybody should have a Benny monster, Eric. In fact, there should be like an official Wild Die Benny monster. We could start our own store.
So describe what it is, cool. Paris.
Okay, sorry, mate. So the Benny monster is actually a dice bag where the opening has cloth teeth sewn into it, and there's these big googly eyes on it, and it's a furry dice bag, and that's what I hold all my chips in, all my bennies, and especially for those kids with high anxiety, or they just don't know how to act within a group, so they're not have to be thrust straight away into trying to play a character and get involved that way. I can get them to sit into the group and listen to the story, and they get to hold the Benny monster, and whenever a Benny gets awarded, then he or she takes out and awards it. But whenever a player goes to use a Benny, the whole table ends up singing out, "Feed the Benny monster," and this kid's like the center of attention. Even though he or she is not involved in the game directly at the start, they get to feel comfortable within the group and get used to that sort of collaborative working, even if it's just passing out bennies, and then you slowly ease them into the game.
Cool. All right. So I hope that I can't even speak. So I hope that helps Byron. If there are any.
What about me? Nobody wants to know what I think, right?
We forgot to ask Eric. Yeah, go on then. You might as well say something. Yeah, go on then.
Hey, Eric, before you start, though, Paris, that sounds a bit like peer pressure. Like you're... You know,
yeah, it is, and it's a powerful tool when you're trying to get kids to do stuff. So that's why you should switch your bennies to cigarettes. Because that's why I started smoking. It was peer pressure, you know? So, yeah.
Or the aforementioned meth we were talking about before the show.
Well, no, calm down, Paris. Let's bang out
peer
order.
Peer pressure can actually be a good thing, Gary, if it's directed in the right way. So actually, peer direction is a big part of the program.
Nice. You should put the Benny monster in like a real bear trap, so when they have to reach in, there's a good chance that they could like lose a limb. And then thirdly, I just want to say I like to keep my bennies in my underwear. That's where my Benny monster is. And I just maybe try that.
So you know what? Actually, I do now want to hear from Eric. No, go on, Eric. Sorry, I looked you over. It's just that.
You.
No, I just don't want it to be boring. This podcast to be boring. So but go on anyway. Who cares?
All right.
Sorry, I'm being really harsh to you today. I'm going to say something nice to balance it out. You have very nice looking eyes.
Your kids have just the right amount of hair, Eric. That's my compliment.
Go on.
Perfect.
So Eric, how do you give out bennies at the table?
Well, the question was actually, how do you remember to hand them out? So I'm actually going to answer his question. Couple things, 3 things. It's a mix of things I've heard, ideas, and things I do. First thing, hold the bennies in your hand while you're GMing the game. That way you'll be reminded that you have bennies in your hand and you should probably hand them out. So that's one thing. Second thing, I would say you can write down the hindrances the player's hindrances on index card or Post-it or whatever, and you can put them on your GM screen if you use it.
Can you say that again? What card? What kind of card?
Index card. Yeah.
For those that don't understand that joke or get it, Gary has forsaken Savage Worlds and has been playing a game called Index Card RPG.
Yep. So yeah, you can do that. That way, you'll be reminded of their hindrances, and if they come into play, you can award a Benny for it. And lastly, well, this is something that Paris mentioned, but I like to at the beginning of a game for a new group, at least, you just tell them that they can nominate each other for bennies. So that's a good way, you in the heat of running your game, someone says something, but you're thinking of something else at the same time. Someone else might say, hey, what he did was cool, or it was funny, or it was a good idea. I think that deserves a Benny, and then you can decide for yourself if it's worth a Benny or not. So, I mean, for me, it took me years to develop this reflex of handing out bennies, right? You come from other systems that don't have that mechanic, and now you have to do it. It's important to do it, but just keep going at it, and it'll come easily.
Also, fart jokes, just give them out whenever somebody says the word fart, or does a fart, or says a fart joke.
It's funny that you give us crap, because the question is, what's the best way to remember to hand out bennies? So you give us crap for our ideas, and then you give him the idea of don't remember, have your players remember for you.
Yeah, and then as soon as Eric starts to answer, he's like, I'm actually going to answer his question. And it's just like, come on, man. You're so passive-aggressive. So passive. This is why I didn't want you to answer. Eric, you don't talk for the rest of the podcast. No, actually, you're allowed to talk, but that's one strike, mister. And then you're off the podcast. As the founder of this podcast, I'm really annoyed.
Actually, I really like that idea of holding a Benny in your hand. I didn't even think about that, but if you've got one in your hand while you're playing, that'll help. I really like that.
What if you're too busy holding something else and no, you know
like
what? I'm not. I'm just saying. What if you think your story is so good that you're behind the screen doing something else because you're just thinking, what a great story this is.
I was just thinking back a while ago where Harrison and I were in agreement on something where we both struggled with how bennies were like a get out of jail free card. But now that I'm in the mindset that bennies are a tool of the GM, they're part of making the game flow and making the game better. So my mind's now sort of always on bennies because of how I use them in the group. But when you said, Eric, that people coming over from another system, in the beginning, especially when I thought bennies were a cheat mode, I didn't think about bennies at all. So just a quick question: Is there a difference with how many bennies you hand out for normal role playing and how many you hand out during combat?
Not really.
No. Don't remember one more than the other? Just asking the question because that's what I do.
I don't think so, no. I don't know.
So, to the edge.
Yeah. You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
So take it to the edge. Yeah, setting rules. So not a couple weeks ago, Eli Kurtz sent me a question while he asked, have you guys ever done an episode devoted to setting rules? What makes a good one versus a bad one? How many is too many, etc. So I don't recall. Maybe back in the day with Jamie there was one, but I actually didn't look. So I thought it'd be a good topic. So, yeah, let's start with open up your book, your Savage Rules book to deluxe, page 108, or if you have the special edition, the hardcover one, it's page 94. So, setting rules. There are many Savage Worlds with settings ranging from dark and gritty detective tales to cinematic epics to political thrillers. These rules provide a great framework for anything you want to do, but adding the right setting rules really bring the world and the action to life. So it's just one small paragraph. That's what setting rules are. I mean, basically, you get the core rules, and then every setting adds rules to it to make it feel more like that setting, right? And they have a couple examples from Blood and Guts, where you can spend Benny on damage. They say use this rule when you really want to up the carnage. Critical failures, if you roll double one. Can't Benny that. Fanatics, like mooks will jump in the way of the big villain. Heroes never die. People that complain that Savage Rules is too deadly. You want something more lighthearted, maybe, cartoon, Saturday morning cartoon type of thing. Multiple language, no PowerPoints. If you want a different magic system and even skill specialization, which I don't know. It's been asked for us to answer that question on the show, and I've never used it. I've played one setting for one session that uses that rule, that's interface 0, and I didn't really care for it. So, well, let's start by asking you guys how important setting rules are in your game, because I'm guessing at least one or maybe two don't really use them all that much here. So I want to start with Gary, because I don't know, Gary, you've read 50 Fathoms, you've read Deadlands, and you've ran them, even Rifts. Is that something you look at, or like it's an afterthought when you run it?
No, I usually don't use them, but I do enjoy reading. High Adventure is a pretty kick-ass one, too, where you can spend a penny to gain a one-time use of a combat edge. That's pretty sweet, except the problem with that is that you end up finding your players like skimming through the books, and it can slow down gameplay, so it's one that I tend to not use. But 50 Fathoms, the best game ever, has some seriously kick-ass setting rules, like armor and swimming, how to navigate your boat, careening. What is it called when they put the boat up on the shore? It's got a weird ass name. Carousing?
Oh, yeah, carousing.
Cabin fever is another one. You start taking hindrances and stuff like that when you're stuck out at sea. Things like this really add a lot to the setting and stuff like that. But I still.
So you're saying you're not using it? You're not using them?
If I was to play like a one shot, I probably wouldn't worry too much about it. But in my 50 Fathoms campaign, oh yeah, I use them for sure. Especially too sometimes. Here in 50 Fathoms, a good example is they have when you fight under the deck. Like, you're not on the top deck, but you're on because it's a smaller space, you take an automatic negative. So there is a hindrance, an edge that you can take. It's called something rat, I think. And it gives you the bonus so that you lose the bonus when you're fighting from the second level of the ship.
Is it build rat?
Yeah.
Could be something like that. Yeah. There's so many good settings, man. 50 Fathoms is the best ever. You guys can suck it. Just saying. I get excited every time I talk about it.
I like it.
But what about you, Paris? Is that something you look at and spend a lot of thought on, or it's whenever they come into play?
So the one setting from the core rules that I always use, the setting rule that I always use from the core rules is critical failure with my work. Actually, even when I play with my friends, I find the best role-playing moments and the best learning experiences come from when a character suddenly finds themselves in a negative situation that they have to work against and fix up, and especially for the kids that I work with, where a lot of the times the first time they hear no or they fail in their eyes, they usually stop and they walk away in real life. So in a game where you can have a critical failure and they can't use that Benny, but they now have to think outside the square, and we sort of examine it as a group and how we can use that to our advantage or how we get around it. So that's a big part of the learning experience. Plus with my mates, with when we play online and etc. with critical failures, like they're just the times when the funniest things happen. So critical failures always, I think it's in every Savage World setting that I run. In terms of others, with ETU, definitely that without those setting rules, it's just not the same game. But I also do Shinetar, and there are so many setting rules in Shinetar that I just can't keep track of them all. So I end up forgetting most of those. There's so many, and there gets a point where, at least for my guys and for my GMing style, where if it's too much, it takes away from the game. So there seems to be this balance that's required, at least from my perspective, within setting rules, that it brings enough flavor into the game that you know you're playing that setting, that it drives that setting. But if you have too much, it just becomes complicated.
So Manuel next, because
So sorry. Say that again.
bless you. So let's ask Manuel next, because we're going to keep Harrison last because he was mean to me at the beginning.
I deserve that.
Well, the main point with setting rules, I would say, is don't overdo it, because the more you put into a game, the more you are going to forget they are there. So I would say ideally you should take like at maximum a handful. Things you can easily remember because they capture the flavor of the setting, and they actually help enhance your experience of experiencing the setting through mechanics. So if you're going for a game where you want combat to feel deadly, like for example, if you want to play Alien or Aliens, go with gritty damage, but also go with, if we're just talking core rules, go with gritty damage, go with blood and guts, because that way combat is going to be really fast and really brutal, just like people were experiencing it in the movies. If you encounter an alien, either it dies or you die, and usually within the first 3 seconds of the scene.
For me, the experience with gritty damage is that it slows the game down, having to roll on the injury table for every wound that you suffer.
Yep, I would agree there. But what you should factor in this is players are not going... Yep, Paris, you wanted to say something, but it just didn't pick up.
No. Don't worry, Gary's distracting.
Okay, so yeah, I agree. It can bog down the game with having to roll on the injury table. But if people know that combat is going to involve gritty damage, they are not going to seek combat as easily as they would in other settings. So overall, there's going to be less combat. So I don't see that really as a problem.
Yeah, I mean, trying to avoid combat because you know it's going to be slow and not quite as fun isn't really the most fun thing on the planet.
Yeah, see, that was my reasoning behind using gritty damage for Forget About It when I designed it, to make it so that, you know, players would think twice about going into combat because it was deadly. But I've ran it quite a few times, and it didn't really have that effect. So I don't know. It looks good on paper. I just don't have... I haven't had good experience with gritty damage, even though, yeah, what you're saying makes sense. It's just, it seems to me like in practice, that's not what happens.
Okay, do you have an idea of another route to go to make combat more deadly, but not make it slower with injury table rolls?
Well, to me, I feel combat is already deadly in Savage Worlds, but the blood and guts, yeah, that's a good one. Giving the opportunity to spend a Benny to reroll damage, to me, that ranks up the damage.
Yeah, I find wounds and fatigue make combat deadly enough. When you get wounds and then you become at a negative, you could just role play that was an arm shot or a leg shot or whatever, and that's why they're suffering a negative at that time. At least that's what I do, because I'm with Eric. If I had to sit there, and the less tables I have to roll on in my games, the better it is. I just too much. But there is, just real quickly before I forget, the Joker's Wild setting rule. When we were talking about the gentleman before was asking about how to remember bennies, I actually put 4 Jokers in my deck. I don't know if anyone else does that, but it helps bring out more bennies in the game and helps me remember them.
Yeah, I don't really do it. I mean, we made the mutation deck, which has 4 Jokers, comes with 4 Jokers, but I don't really do it. I guess it would depend what type of setting campaign you're running. If it's high action, yeah. If it's horror, I'm not sure it's quite fitting, but it's good to have more Jokers, definitely, especially if you're not good at remembering to hand them out, so to award them. All right, Harrison.
To me, I like to stay as sort of close to core as possible. If a setting has a like too many setting rules, it can be a turn off. I mean, it's like you were saying about the Goon, Eric. That's a setting that interested me like a little bit, not that much, but I had a passing interest in it. And when you were telling me about that, I was like, well, it's not like I would not pick it up. Not pick up a setting if it had a load of setting rules, but I just wouldn't necessarily use them, or I tweak it for my own interests, and I do it more to what I like as opposed to using all of them. But I tend to prefer ones that have less, because the worry is if you're changing out all of those setting rules, that you're changing something that is essential to that setting. Do you know what I mean? And so things like Solomon Kane and Sixth Gun and things like this, those things I really like, because that there's not that many setting rules, and if you're playing them as intended, that it's pretty close to original, and I like that. And I tend to always use it. What's the one where you can't reroll crit fails? Is it just called critical failures?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always use that and Joker's Wild. And those are pretty much a 100% always use in every game that I play. But I know it's kind of a boring answer, but that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't tend to use that many. Although I obviously will read the book from cover to cover whenever I play a new setting, and I'll double check it. But what I kind of like in a setting is a very, very good example is the Savage Fallout. And that doesn't have that many setting rules. Like, it's got a couple, but they're really good. And they just change a couple of things to make it more Fallouty. But what it does is it has a big list of new hindrances and a big list of new hindrances which mimic like the perks from Fallout and things like this, and new gear that make it feel like Fallout. And that I really, really like, rather than having to change the game system in a massive way. It does it in small ways, but not in a gigantic way.
Mm-hmm.
So to me,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we're all in agreement with that. That not too many. The thing is, when you open a book, most books will have a section, a chapter entitled "Setting Rules" or a variation of that title, but then you have more rules in the book that aren't labeled as setting rules, but are basically setting rules. Like, I'll take Savage Rifts. You open up the book, the Tomorrow Legion, And I think there's 5 setting rules in there, but then you've got new rules on cybernetics, and then later on in a book, in a sidebar, you have something that says that each separate power or spell is a separate action. So basically, you could cast more than one spell in one round, which is cool. But it is a setting rule, but it's not located in the setting rules chapter. So you could read and I think Savage Risk is a big example of that it changes a lot of rules. They're just not all located in the setting rules chapter. So you have hidden setting rules. Not long ago, I reviewed Accursed, and you've got the Defiance and Acceptance rule where you can become more monster or human, and then this is a separate chapter, but really it is a setting rule. It's more rules for the setting, because I kind of identified 3 to 5 different types of setting rules. You've got those that I call intrusive, like Dueling in Deadlands, where instead of just shooting at each other, you start playing this mini card game in the middle of it, maybe just slow it down. It's like a slow motion. To me, that feels intrusive. To some, it might not feel intrusive. And then the hacking rules in Interface 0 2.0, I mean, I think it's about 10 pages worth of hacking rules in there that are really well designed. They're cool when you read them, but when you stop to play the game and use these rules, you'll see that it really slows down the game. So to me, that falls into the intrusive category, but of course it might vary from one GM to another too.
No, see, this is what I rather liked about Manuel's Savage Shadowrun and what it ended up being, because I think at the start, Manuel, you were saying that you tried to create a lot of stuff just to mimic what Shadowrun was doing, and then you realized that you could just stick closer to core and do certain things just using the normal stats on a character's sheet. So for example, if you were doing decking, or for those that don't know Shadowrun, that's a kind of Shadowrun version of hacking, well then that's you if you, presuming you've already hacked in, then that's going to be an investigation roll and things like this, and like that's like, for example, in Deadlands, I think that the dueling mechanic is not necessary. It's not, and why have that when you've already got agility, you've already got shooting? It's just a case of who does it quicker. There's no need for this mini game, and any setting that comes out, if it's a unique setting in some way, will try to add some unique mechanic in there, and then not put it as a setting rule. Like, let's say, for example, I made a RPG, a setting all about cooking. Then I would have a big section about the new cooking mechanics, but not label it a setting rule. And I just think it's unnecessary when you've already got knowledge cooking. But I guess if you made a whole setting revolving around it, you've got to have something like that.
Yeah, you've got to have a certain focus. It's like, the combat mechanics in Savage Rules are really well developed because you're going to do a lot of it. Now, one could say, why not just do an opposed fighting roll and have the combat over with, which would be kind of boring, right? So, because it's a big focus. So
I guess that's why that wouldn't necessarily be labeled a setting rule, because a setting rule is kind of different, where that's more like, I guess it's a smaller thing, whereas if something is an entire focus, then that becomes something bigger, where it's like more of a focal point. But I guess it still is a setting rule. It's just a big setting rule.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
the dueling in Deadlands, you guys have knocked it now like a couple of times, and it is probably one of the best setting rules ever created, next to, say, Blaze of Glory inside of Rips. One of the best games that I've ever played was a game where we were typing everything into Fantasy Grounds with Jamie Pearson, and we did this duel that was so frickin' intense, and we didn't speak a word. It was just insane. Now, the idea behind dueling in Deadlands is every time you draw your cards or whatever, you're setting yourself up to gain positives or negatives. And the idea is, if you've ever watched like old westerns where you're standing in the streets and you see the guy's hands, they're twitching by their guns and stuff like that, and they're eyeing each other down. Like dueling inside of Deadlands is this whole other kind of thing. It's not just so much a setting rule as it is a way to get the feel that you're actually like getting ready to gun some guy down. In if you play the setting, or if you've tried dueling in Deadlands, it's the way that it's set up is fantastic. Like it actually lends a ton of flavor to the game.
I get that, but the only problem I have with things like that, and this is honestly laziness, because I understand that when you actually play it, it can be great. The only trouble is that sometimes when there's a rule like that in a book, and I already know how to play this game and know how to run it, and then there's something like that, and I get to it, and it's kind of hard for me to remember. I'll be like, oh man, this is like more rules, and now I already knew how to play this game. That's kind of annoying.
Yeah, now let's open up the book and then read.
I mean, the amount of times I've been at a game, right, and then
breaks the flow.
And we're having this awesome flow, and everyone's getting into it. We're immersed, and we're having this great time. And then it's like, hey, let's shut it down because so and so doesn't know the dueling rules, or so and so doesn't know the magic rules for this specific fantasy setting or whatever. And it's just like, cool, good times.
But isn't that the point of a setting rule?
Yeah, pulling dueling out of Deadlands, you might as well throw away the freaking entire Western theme to it. It is that relevant to the setting. You're like ripping the guts out of it and just throwing it aside.
Hardly, dueling, man. I mean, like 90%.
No, you are. Trust me.
No, 90% of players.
Why not just an opposed? Why not just an opposed roles? And then you keep spending chips.
That's dull.
Yeah. Have you ever watched a Western where two dudes just walk out into the middle of the thing and like inside of 1 second they pull their guns out, blam, blam, and then they just walk off? There's like this whole like do-do-do-do-do-do, and they walk out there.
Have you ever played with a player who's like decided to go along with it because it's cinematic? No. The chances are the bad guy's going to go, right, let's walk 10 paces, and then the player's going to go, right, as soon as he gets 2 paces away, I'm turning around shooting that guy in the back of the head.
No.
Oh, no. Okay, fine. That's it then. Nope.
Never.
Well, that may happen, but then there'd be consequences too. But it's interesting with what Gary said. Now, I haven't played that in Deadlands, so I haven't seen it play out. But my understanding of what a setting rule is within a setting for Savage Worlds is we've got our core skeleton of Savage Worlds, and then to make it feel that setting instead of just Savage Worlds, you add these elements in. Right, so if I want to have that intense duel that's in Deadlands, then there's a mechanic for it. I have to use it, but if it's not there, it would seem that tension of a standout duel on the streets of whatever town it is,
Shitterton,
like an opposed role. That's, I don't know, man. It's just, that sounds dull to me, like unless you had this big role-playing session. But if there's actually a mechanic and each card brings a little more tension to it, and the group is with it. I mean, if you want to bring the game along, then happy days. But
there's
from what Gary's telling me,
there's a mechanic that already exists within Savage Worlds to do that, which is why this is unnecessary. So let's say, for example, you roll your roll, the other guy rolls his roll, then you spend a Benny, the other guy spends a Benny, you roll your roll, the other guy rolls his roll, you spend a Benny, the other guy spends his Benny. There's already a mechanic that creates tension within Savage Worlds, and they've added another one in unnecessarily. There's already a mechanic for this. And that's that.
Except then you might run out of Bennies. That actually does sound dull. I don't know. I'd like to see this Deadlands thing. The way Gary's describing it to me, I'm actually more excited to go read it.
Okay, no, you're right. But the trouble is that what it's good on paper, but what ends up happening at the table more often than not, and this happens with a lot of setting rules. And I'm willing to admit that yes, that is a cool part of Deadlands when it's done right. But what actually ends up happening, and this isn't just with that in Deadlands, it's with a lot of setting rules in a lot of settings, is you go, all right, let's do a duel. This is going to be very exciting. Okay, you walk 10 paces this way. bad guy McRad walks 10 paces that way, and you turn around, and then or you've got your hand by your hip or whatever, and they open the book and you go, so what card did you pull? And what card did you pull? Hang on, just let me check the table. What does that mean? Okay, what dice did you roll? What dice? Okay, let me just check what that means. Okay, hang on 1 sec. Sorry, what page was the dueling rules again? Sorry, I just put the book down. Sorry, what card did you get again? And that's what...
Are you feeling the tension right now?
Yeah, how tense do you feel right now?
Actually, what I'm feeling is an unprepared GM. I mean, if you knew a duel was going to be in your game, then you bone up on your dueling rule,
right?
And you have it ready to rock and roll.
But then sometimes you don't know it's going to happen, and more often than not, those rules get used so infrequently that most people just don't memorize them. It's a fact, man. Unfortunately,
it's always tell when Harrison hasn't used a rule because he doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, but it's not a case of I haven't used it. I've played with seasoned Deadlands dudes, and this has happened to me. And it's not just in Deadlands, but I'm talking about other settings as well. And I'm not saying this is something I've done. I'm saying I've seen it with other people in other games.
Yeah. So honestly, Gary, you've ran them. If right now we were to run a duel right now, would you be able to run it from memory without opening your book?
Okay, fair statement. I'm giving you that. I wouldn't be able to do it this second, but I also haven't ran a Deadlands campaign in probably 6, 7, 8 months. But when I was running my Deadlands campaign, you're bloody right, I knew how to do those. And I will also concede to the fact that the first time I did it, I had to go over it because it just seemed, like you say, clunky. But once I got the hang of it and I read the rules and I knew how to do it, then it became this cool thing where my players rolled into town one time. And I started off this thing is the Andrew, the one kid. I'm like, I said to the table, who wants for a Benny? Who wants to duel? Because I just think the mechanic's super cool. Andrew's like, I'll do it. So I started off with this guy screams across the town. He's like, and I can't remember what Andrew's name is, but we're gonna call him, Tommy Gunswell or something, right? And I was like, Tommy Gunswell, you scoundrel, is that you? Damn you. And then I just went on this big tirade, which is part of how you set up the duel. You scumbag, you stole my invention. I'm going to gun you down. I challenge you to a duel. And then they face off in the streets. They don't just turn 10 paces and go, I'm going to shoot, roll my dice. Every time you do the card, there's a taunt feature that's added to it. You lay down the card, somebody gets a bonus. You lay down another card, somebody gets a bonus. And the whole time they're doing these things where they're taunting, and then they do the stare down, and it just becomes super intense before the actual accumulation of bonuses to the end result, which is the roll to see who shoots. There's way more to it, but I agree with what you're saying. The first time you do it, I wouldn't do it in a one shot. I would do it in a campaign. I would know the rules or relearn the rules to do it, because it can be super freaking intense when you're like waiting and all three, even the other players are sitting around the table staring at the cards as they get flipped, and they're like, what's going to happen next, kind of a thing, before the final, just like you guys say, roll the dice and do the shooting.
Here's the trouble, though. I feel like you're an exception. If you're somebody that actually knew what you were doing with those, I think you're an exception, because I feel like there's been other cases of this happening as well, and it's like you often get people. Yeah, there's just these certain rules that I memorized. I mean, I know this isn't necessarily a setting rule, but I see the same things happen with chase rules as well. I've never ever seen it go nicely, actually, except for in the Wise Guys one. Eric, you're the only psychopath that has those memorized.
Ouch.
But in a case like even the chase rules, they're not that long. So if you get to a point where you have to go over them quickly in the game, just tell your players, right, buy a break, go get a drink, because this next scene is going to be so bowel-looseningly intense. Just empty now, right? And then come back to the table and we would be ready to play. there are very few Savage World rules or Savage World setting rules that are, except for maybe Interface 0, that are like so long that you couldn't at least take a small break to catch them, and that break's not going to affect the game that much. It's probably going to improve the tension of the duel or the other setting.
I do agree with Gary. If there's anything like that, for example, there was a small rule I remember once that I had in Solomon Kane. So if there's anything like that could come up, You should memorize it, like the duel rules. And I remember there was one that was the rules for making grenades in Solomon Kane. And I just knew this was going to come up. I knew it. Because there was one point, right, where the guys were in an alchemist lab, right? And they just saw this alchemist lab and were just like, oh, we should mix some stuff together and see what happens. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to roll to see if they breathe in noxious gas or they make something worthwhile. And just this, not fudged it, but just made something up for that point, and was just like, okay, let's see what happens. And then I knew that as soon as they created something worthwhile, they're going to want to do this again. So immediately I was like, well, I'm going to need to memorize this rule in Solomon Kane for creating grenades. I'm sure it's like a common thing in Savage Worlds core, but anyway, it's in there. I'm like, I know they're going to want to do this forever now. Now they've discovered something useful trick. They're going to do it all the time. So I went to this whole page that was all about creating gunpowder, grenades, guns, things like this. And I memorized a lot of it because you're going to have to use it, and you're going to have to. It's going to be important. So I did this, and like it's the same thing with the duels, I guess. It's if it's going to come up in that setting, then you're going to have to do it. And yeah, lo and behold, we're kind of doing it semi-differently because it's not grenades. They're using alchemy as opposed to black powder. But I just use those rules for creating these alchemist fire things that they constantly use. Every time they're traveling to a new place, now they're like, can we stop and get ingredients on the way? Can we stop and get ingredients on the way? And then they'll make bombs. And they even used it to kill the Pope at one point. But that's besides the point.
All right, let's go back to this. I want to go down a couple more types of setting rules. Some of them are more like house rules. We mentioned Joker's Wild, which I love. I use it all the time. But does it really add to the theme of the game you're running? It doesn't really. It's more like a house rule, or some people like the extra effort or that type of thing, where it doesn't really, well, to me anyway, it doesn't add to the theme of whatever game you're running. It's just how you prefer to run Savage Worlds. Just like you guys said, most of us like to use critical failures and Joker's Wild because they balance each other in a way, and they make things more fun. But when you use them across the board with every setting, it becomes more of a house rule, at least to me. Then you got the thematic ones those don't really change the rules all that much. They just try to drive a point across. Like Tropicana, you've got an optional rule called Jukebox, where when your theme song plays, you get some type of bonus. That adds to the theme quite a bit, but it doesn't really change the rules all that much. Mars as stunts, when you perform stunts, I think you get a Benny just for doing that, which is more of a way to award Bennies, and that's what thematic rules are usually. And forget about it. I added that if you talk like a Goomba, you get a Benny, because you're trying to make it feel like you're part of the mafia. The Goon, comedy and tragedy, it just decides which theme the adventure will be. Is it going to be more comedy or tragedy? And then the anecdotal non sequiturs, that one where you start a scene in the middle of a joke or something like that, which doesn't really change the rules. It's just trying to make it more thematic. So those are the three main ones. And then you got some that modify the rules to their core, really. Super Violence and Streets of Bedlam, basically before becoming shaken, you get to roll some type of cosmetic damage, so it basically changed how shaken and receiving wounds work in Savage Worlds. And then others that add rules that are necessary to make it feel like you're in that setting, such as the infection rules in War of the Dead. So you can become a zombie in this setting, so you need some type of rules to determine, when do you become infected, and what's the process with that. Or even crew upkeep in 50 Fathoms. You're going to be on a ship, you're going to have a crew, you need to have some type of guidelines on how you're going to pay these people on your boat, or maybe not. Maybe you could just hand wave it. I don't know. But those are basically, the types I've noticed. So, to answer how many should a setting have? I mean, some settings like Low Life and Nemesis have absolutely no setting rules. Some are hidden, but they don't even have a chapter for setting rules. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Goon with 19 freaking setting rules. So, I think you guys already kind of answered that, but where's the good middle ground? For me, I mean, the easy answer to this is as many as the setting needs. But what exactly does the setting needs? To me, that's where it's very subjective. Some people will like a lot of them because they want rules for every situation, and some GMs just don't want too many, and they're just going to wing it when it happens, when they come up.
It can be quite upsetting, I was going to say, quite annoying when something like the Goon has so many, because you might have somebody that is a massive fan of those comic books who bought Savage Worlds, read Savage Worlds to play the Goon, and then got onto that and went, Jesus Christ, this changes everything now. Now I have to change all that stuff I just read. I only read this to play this goddamn setting, and now this book changes everything that I just read, and it's like doubly confusing. I
disagree with that, because you look at everybody, all the new Savages we have because of Savage Rifts, and I had this discussion with a bunch of them where I kept complaining, it changes the rules too much, and to them, what they said was, well, this was our introduction to Savage Worlds. This is Savage Worlds to us. It's no big deal. We don't have to learn new rules. They're just part of the rules that we just learned. I think when it becomes problematic is because, well, Savage Worlds was first built with the conceit that, you start with one setting and then you move on to the next. So when you do that a lot, then you have new rules to learn every time. But if you start out with the Goon and that's your first Savage World setting, and maybe that's the only one you're ever going to play, well, big deal. Okay, I got 19 more rules to learn, but it's just that setting, right?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So, yeah, well, cool, I guess then. Who cares?
No, I think it's a valid point, but I mean, I guess you got to ask, what are setting rules there for? Because you've brought up, well, the rule, it's already in the rules when we're talking about Deadlands. Why do we need something else? And the author of that setting is trying to promote that setting above the core Savage Worlds rules. There's that layer on top. Savage Worlds is the backbone. Right. This is this new bit that goes on top. So people take different approaches. That some of them think that you need a billion rules that do everything that might be special within that setting, and others have like, let's say, ETU, which is more subtle. There's only the academics part that you have to worry about as a new rule. Other than that, there's rituals. So there's no other arcane backgrounds, just the rituals component for casting any spells. And they have the flavor of ETU, where you've got to sit down, collect bits, do a ritual, and you may summon a demon, or something bad might happen, even though you're just trying to make a love potion. So the question, I guess, because the question was it too many? Is that what the original question was? Is how many is too many, or what do you need in them?
Yeah, right.
So I think, would you agree that as a group, we sort of said, if there's too many that we can't remember them all, that's too many? Or if it makes the game so complicated that it slows our games down, that's too many. Is that, because we're looking at different sides. We're looking at writers here who are writing games, and they have to decide what settings they put in it. And me as just a GM, I could ignore setting rules if I want to, but there are ones that I absolutely love. So,
right.
so with like I've noticed. I'm on the record saying this. I looked over ETU so many times. I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever thought of as an idea. Right? I come across, and then when I was forced to play it, and I actually read the book, the setting rules in this creates that feeling of that game. Like, I've never been to East Texas. I've never been to a college in America. I don't know the the way people act on campus there, and but this setting, and it is a really small setting when you look at pages, right? And it is so, like, my hat's off to the author of this. They have captured at least maybe the stereotypical East Texas, and I and my players, with just the small amount of setting rules and a couple of clever changes to the core Savage World rules, have really given us that feel for what it's like to go to university. And even making university a tense thing, such as like the gunfighting, because I've got these players that are fighting supernatural guys, but they're more worried about passing their classes than they are about getting bitten by a zombie. And to me, that makes it a very successful setting rule, and a very successful setting.
Yeah, I mean, and the setting rules do make it to an extent, and that is, I suppose that shows how powerful they can be when used right, you know. And they're relatively simple in ETU, but they make all the difference because people want to pass the classes, you know. And ETU is such a fantastic setting as well, because of them. But the thing is, ETU, what that does is it doesn't it wouldn't exist, and it wouldn't be quite as successful as it was without them, and that's what it is. Whereas some settings, they say. I can't think of any examples, but some settings will say, this setting requires Joker's Wild, and it's like, well, does it? You know, like, I can't think of an example, but Eric, I'm sure you can. But yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's say, for example, I brought out my new setting all about playing as hookers, right? And then it'll be like, this setting requires Joker's Wild, and then I'm like... People often be like, no, that you've only put that setting rule in there because that's the one you use at your table when you play it. It's not actually one that's essential to the setting. A good example of one that is essential to playing that setting is Aliens vs. Rednecks, available on DriveThruRPG right now, where in that setting, you're playing aliens disguised as rednecks, and when people look at you, simply because you're wearing a redneck t-shirt, you don't look like an alien. It's like Clark Kent when he puts on glasses. And that's kind of the thing, like, that's essential to that setting in the way that it works. You can roam around this town pretending to be a human, and even though you look like a hideous alien, you still, for some reason, look human just because you put on redneck clothing. And that's essential to that game. As soon as your clothing gets damaged and it comes off, people will go, holy crap, you're an alien! And that's, like, an essential setting rule. That's not just, hey, Joker's Wild are essential to this setting. Do you know what I mean?
So Gary has said that dueling mechanic is essential to that game, and you guys on the flip side have said, nah, it's too long. Just out of interest, do you guys like Deadlands?
Yeah, I love Deadlands.
Or
I've only played it.
Okay,
I've only played it a handful of times, but every time I've had a great time with it, except for when I dueled.
Yeah, great setting. Deadlands, great.
I've GM'd it a couple of times and I've played it a couple of times, and I loved it every time. Except for when I played it, I had to go into a duel, and it was like pulling teeth.
It was. It will be the first couple of times, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be smacking yourself for not using it. I want to go back to the hookers.
It wasn't me GMing when I did the duel. I was as a player.
Well, either way, whoever was running the duel might not have known off the top of their head, and I can see what you're saying. That would definitely slow it down. But anyways, the hooker. What's good setting rules for the hooker setting that you're running?
Well, I was thinking
disease.
No. Yeah, I was just about to say that, but I was going to stop myself from saying it. Okay, enough.
Pimp slap.
Pimp slap. No, that's good. But Paris I can't remember exactly what he said, but I know it gave me a cue for the next question. So I think we're saying here that you can just disregard some setting rules most of the time if you don't feel like using them. So let's say you're talking to the designer in me, and as everybody knows, I'm writing a setting. So is it better for me to put more setting rules than you need, or is it better to put less and then have you filling the blanks? Because let's say I'm writing 2 books. They're both going to be, I don't know, $10 each. One of them has 2 setting rules, and the other one has 12 setting rules in case they might come into play. Which one would you pick? Maybe Manuel's been quiet the whole time. What do you think, Manuel? Is it better to have too many or too few?
I would probably rather go with too few, because as I said before, if there's too many, people are just going to forget them anyways. Or the game's going to get bogged down like hell because people are always going through the book and trying to remember that one particular setting rule that might apply in that given moment. So I'd rather go with less is more.
Follow-up question. Would you rather die from being too hot or too cold?
Oh, definitely from being too hot. I hate the cold. If I go out, please let it be in a blaze of glory and not in a freeze of glory.
Okay.
Wow. I would choose the opposite. I would go cold, because if you go cold, eventually you just stop feeling and then you just die. Whereas if you're on fire, you're feeling the whole time. You're like, I'm on fire!
Yeah, but you'll be nice and warm for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Freeze me up.
Here's your question, Eric. From my perspective, I think about ETU and I've said it's setting rules light. There's actually parts within the game as you go through that are setting specific. So, but they have a way. I think any setting rule should be on the character sheet for the most part. So in ETU, you've got your academic score. There's also that if you have a used car in ETU, each one of them has like a little gremlin, and that goes on your character sheet, which has always helped aid to the game. And even things like the hindrance of a curse, where you draw a card at the start of every session if that character has it, to see what their curse is. That's fun, and it's quick, and it really gives you the feel for the setting. So I've listed a number of things there. Very simple to understand, very quick to run through, even when you do the exam bit. But because they capture the flavor, that's what you'd be looking for. So the number of them isn't really what would get me. It's how technical they are, how much work I have to put in. So if I follow what Harrison was saying about the duel, if the duel system takes too long, and I haven't read it, but if the duel system takes the whole session, you don't want that, because you're right, you pulled out of the immersion, and it's no good.
Oh,
but if it say again,
it's not that long.
It's not that long.
No.
So you could have as many as you like, but if they're quick and they're subtle and they alter the character a bit, or they're on the character sheet, or if the information is easy to access, you can go hard because you won't forget them. But it's when you have to remember 47 different types of ways you can do combat in a round, or how 47 different ways you're going to use a Benny. My lord, that's just too much, you know?
Well, but what if some people might be interested in different things? But basically, is it better to have more and be able to remove what you don't need, or is it better to have less and have to make up the whole, the stuff that you need? It's like, you buy a car, you're going to pay $20,000 for the same car. One of them has 20 more options. If it's the same price, which one do you want,
Well, then that works all right, because I wouldn't use all the options, but I will use the ones that I use regularly, or the ones that keep my butt warm, or play the CD that I want. Sorry, I'm showing my age. Play the MP3 that I want. So you can, I don't know. You can put more in, but if I have to remember them all, I've just put it. Maybe have some core settings.
You don't have to use them all.
Extras if you want.
You don't have to use them all. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying. It's options.
I don't think everybody sees it like that. I think a lot of people see it like everything that is in there has to be used because it is in there. Otherwise, you're playing it wrong and you are having the wrong kind of fun. Get the away from my table. And
There it is. The first curse of the podcast. What you got to do, Drew, is you got to have enough setting rules that other people on other podcasts will complain that there's 19 setting rules, just so that we can sort of like come full circle, and people will be like, "Oh, this effing wise guys! I thought it was going to be so good, but 20 freaking setting rules." Or you could just simplify this whole thing and solve it with one possible word. Change it from setting rules and just put like possible in front of it. Possible setting rules. And then you're done. Just add all you want.
Great idea.
Pick 5.
Because that's the thing. I mean, sure, you have settings, but you also have a few books like Companions, or you have Agents of Oblivion and Codex Infernus, which are settings, but they're also toolkits at the same time, where they're there to provide, more options, more tools in your box. But I just looked them over this morning, and even those being toolboxes, I think one has 3 setting rules and the other one has 5. So they don't offer that many tools in your box, really.
True, but do you really need more? If those 5 setting rules is really all you need to hit it on the head, and everything else would be just like bloatware where you just tuck stuff in just for the sake of generating more word count, then I think it has the adverse effect. I'd rather have a toolkit that gives me 5 amazing options instead of one that gives me 50 options and 30 of them are pure crap.
If the setting rule doesn't give me a feel for the setting, and it's just there, or maybe even just like niche stuff within the setting, no, get rid of that. That's as Manuel said, that's just bloatware. Just stick with the core stuff and the stuff that makes that setting the setting, and easily picked up, easily understood. Because that's the other thing we want about Savage Worlds, is we want everyone to grasp what we're talking about, what we're playing at, as quickly as possible, so we can just get on with the game.
Completely agree. But I just wanted to ask you guys one final thing. We've discussed as well how sometimes setting rules can be kind of just like the house rules that the writers put in there. Are there any of your own, and this got to be quick because we're running low on time, but are there any of your own setting rules that you just apply to every single game that you play? That you've only made up ones that you've made up in your own lab?
Well, in my case, that's easy, and I already answered it before. It's Joker's Wild, which I use in pretty much every game if I were to run something like a
But you didn't make that one. But you didn't make that one up.
So you're asking specifically for made up setting rules?
Yeah.
Oh crap! Then no.
Gary?
I'm not that smart, dude. I'm not that. Just saying.
Eric?
I like some type of failing forward mechanic in there. So like with Backlash for Arcane Backgrounds, you can succeed on a spell, casting a spell, but if you rolled a 1 on your casting die, something bad happens. And I use that throughout the game for any occasion. It could be climbing roll, you couple guys trying to scale a wall, you succeed because of your wild die, but you rolled 1 on climbing. Now you just knocked a rock loose and it fell on top of the guy right below you, and now that guy's in trouble. So I like to do that because it just spices it up more.
Very good. And how about you, Paris?
To be honest, I can't recall if I thought of this or I read it somewhere. I'm pretty sure I read it somewhere. But I allow my players to spend a Benny before rolling to add +2 to their roll. One of the things I like to work with my kids is risk reward. So and sort of managing resources. So they're making those decisions all the time about is it worth me risking this Benny? Am I going to need it to soak, or do I need to make this roll? So if it is a house rule and I didn't read it somewhere, that's mine. That
Have
they
you got
can
a
use a
name for
Benny
that?
to put at.
We could call it conteing a roll.
Wait, maybe I didn't understand. Isn't it like Elan +2 when you spend a Benny to reroll?
No,
Is it?
because in Elan, if you have to re-roll and you get the +2 afterwards, what Paris is saying is to spend a Benny, you get +2 flat.
Oh, okay. So like extra effort, but just a flat +2. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that.
And what about you, Harrison? Well, thanks for asking. Well, what I tend to do is we've got a rule, and I apply this to pretty much any RPG, but Savage Worlds as well specifically. At our table, we have if you have said it and you say I do this specifically, not I'm thinking of doing this, but if you say I do this or my character does this, then you've done it and you've got to roll for it.
Yeah.
No discussion.
I have that same rule. You say it, you play it.
Yeah.
That is the rule at my table most of the time.
Yeah, and I think it leads to a lot of... Well, I mean, you make snap decisions at a table. It's got to happen, mate. It's always fun. You see people say, I jump over the chasm. It's like, well, you're going down that chasm then, my friend.
So, yeah, I mean, in conclusion, I would say how many's too many, or
19.
What makes a good one or a bad one? I think... I mean, designing a setting right now, that's probably the hardest thing for me, because I first started trying to picture every type of situation that the characters might be in, typical situation for a criminal setting, and then coming up with rules for that. In most cases, it was just a variation of dramatic task or social conflict. But some of them I felt I needed to add. And then through playtest, I found out that some of them never came up, and I just removed them. So how many is too many? I think it needs as many as the setting needs, but ask yourself, does this really add something to your setting? Does it make it feel more like your setting? If it doesn't, then it's a house rule, or not necessary. I mean, I looked at let's see.
Sorry, Eric. Sorry to interrupt, but I think there's. The 19 is definitely too much, though, isn't it? It is too much. That is just taking the mick. But is anyone actually playing the Goon at the moment? Just email in, please, because I genuinely want to know, because that when it first came out, everyone was like, "Oh, the Goon is so sick! Oh, wow, the Goon!" And it's like, come on, mate, are you for real? Just genuinely email us in if anyone is still playing that, because I feel like the hype died down for that like faster. It went down like your mum on a Friday night. And seriously, that is insane.
I saw someone on Twitter last week that tweeted that they played the Goon. So that's the first.
Well, they're probably a liar. No, but for real, like more than one person, I'd like to know.
Went down faster than your mom after a single malt beer on a Friday night.
Right. And because I mean, it's about focus, really. Like I've seen a fan made Star Wars setting, and they have setting rules for military ranks in Star Wars. I mean, sure, you can be part of the Rebel Alliance or whatever, but is this really what Star Wars is about? Do you really need military rules in Star Wars? I don't think so. Just like in ETU, you might be, recruited into the army. I mean, you can even be part of the ROTC in there, but do you really need military ranks setting rules in ETU? No, you don't, and that's why it's not in there. So to me, but for a military campaign such as Weird War II, of course you do. You need that. So to me, that's what I mean by good and bad setting rules, where you really need it for this. So yeah, in closing, I would say you need as many as is needed in the setting, but make sure that they fit the theme, that they're necessary to play the game, or they add the flavor of the game.
Yeah, I agree. Episode over. Let's go home.
You guys want to close out too? Your closing statement on this?
I'm just kidding. I completely agree. I think that instead of adding stuff in there just to be your personal house rules, when you put a setting rule in there, think, does it further the setting than does it add to it? I just completely agree with you. That's why, as Paris very rightly pointed out, E2U setting rules make the setting and they further it, as it does with AVR, which was Aliens vs. Rednecks, which is very well written and available now for pay what you want on Drive-Thru RPG. Just fantastic. I mean, and the writers for that one, so handsome. So handsome.
What is happening right now? What is happening?
I'm just pointing out 2 great settings.
He's plugging his own stuff. That's what he's doing.
I don't know who wrote it. I mean, we can't confirm, but it is great. That's all I know. Paris, how about you, man?
I've got this urge to run over to Drive-Thru RPG. I almost feel like I've been hypnotized to go and do that.
It's weird, isn't it? It's such a strange feeling.
Yeah, I guess. Look, I sit in the camp as we were talking about before. If there's too many, I play Shintar. I love it. I play it with the kids in my group, but there's a whole bunch of setting rules I don't use in there. I don't think they need to be in there. I think the characters have already got that high fantasy feel without those extra setting rules to make it higher fantasy. But the setting rules, they should be about getting the players to really feel the world that they're in. That's what they're about. And if the setting rule doesn't do that, if it bogs the game down or it makes the mechanics too complicated, then they're not necessarily, and just to avoid them, just get rid of them. It's a quandary because I've been thinking about how many is there a number you can quantify? What actually is a setting rule? Because now we've seen that some of the setting rules are buried deeper in the book. They could be an edge. They could be a change to the way magic is. They could be a change to the way the chase rules are run. I'm not sure we've even defined what a setting rule is now, other than that it gives flavor to the game. So I've listed on a question, not on a final note.
So
yeah, thanks, Paris. Right, we've got another hour to do now.
We're here to help.
I think we got to start over because this is a podcast on setting rules that does not determine what a setting rule is. That's it. Oh, okay.
You figure it out. Over. How about you, man?
Yeah. I would say, and I would add to that to something Paris just said. Don't be afraid to leave off setting rules if they don't do anything for you in regards to the setting or in regards to how you would like to run your table. Paris, you look like you just had an idea. Spit it out.
I just thought of a question that I really should have asked Eric ages ago. At what point in the creation process of your setting did setting rules come up? Were they at the start? Like, did you go, I have to have these setting rules and then build everything from there? Or did you just do the theme and then go, oh crap, I need some setting rules?
Well, I know, sorry to interrupt, Eric. I know you asked Eric this question, but let me talk about Aliens versus Rednecks for a minute. This sort of came up very early during the process because it had to complement the setting, and if you're making a setting rules need to come up very early on. So that's just my answer for Aliens versus Rednecks, available now.
Yeah, now for me, the setting rules are probably the first thing that I do. That I did for Wise Guys anyway, and every time I create something, that and edges, hindrances, it helps me frame the rest of the game. Some people will write the fluff first and then come up with setting rules and character options afterwards. I did it backwards because that's how it worked for me. And then, like I said, through playtesting and writing some more stuff, I probably deleted half of what I had to begin with, where I realized that, it would be useful, but maybe one game out of 50 games where it would come up. So I decided that, to trust the GMs to make their own call when that happens, and they can just make up whatever they want.
I'm trying to think of those games that have existed in another game format before they came across to Savage Worlds. I'm pretty sure the ones that I've read, I found the setting rules in those to be kind of weak because they're trying to adapt something from another game. Whereas if you're building it from the ground up and you've got the idea of setting rules in your head first and then build around it, I think that makes a far better Savage World setting.
Yep, just don't use setting rules to convert game mechanics into Savage Worlds that don't really fit there. Use it to capture the flavor of the setting. If that happens to work the same way as mechanics in another game work, cool. Bonus points for you. But don't try to cram something in there that just doesn't fit with the rest of how the system works. Just go with flavor. Flavor always wins. Savage Worlds can do the rest.
Yeah, and Star Wars is a very good example of that, where people will just, instead of watching the movies and, you know, breaking them apart and deciding what makes Star Wars, will take, you know, Star Wars D6 from back in the day, and then they'll take this Saga edition, and then they'll try to convert everything that they found in these books, and that's a bad conversion. But that's a different topic for another day. What about you, Gary?
I have to poo.
All right, so should we wrap this up, guys?
All right, let's wrap this up.
Yo, motherfuckers, you all best back up. I always got a gun, I always come strap up. This ain't a game of pool, it ain't no time for no rack up. It's the motherfucking time for the wrap up. Anyone who disagrees will get smack up. See me back in school when I shouldn't have learned to add up. Found a gun on the floor, instead I picked that up. Anyway, sorry, I'm motherfucking back up. What I'm trying to say is it's time for the wrap up. Yeah, this one goes out to all the ladies and all the men out there. Everyone in the front row, grease up. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes, Mr. President. It is pay what you want on Drive-Thru RPG.
Wrap up.
No. Versus Rednecks. That's Aliens versus Rednecks. Yeah, you're gonna love it. Okay. Sorry, that was President Donald Trump. Just asking about a great product available now on Drive-Thru RPG.
Just jumping in here short with something short, because Eric, you mentioned Star Wars. I don't know if you guys saw it over in the Savage Worlds Game Master community on Google Plus. Chad Jones posted a blog post about how he would model the light side and the dark side in Savage Worlds, and I was clicking that link. I was like, oh god, here we go again with some converted mechanics and something like that. And what he actually did was, it wasn't even a setting rule, it was just two hindrances which capture the flavor of the light side and the dark side. So if you're a dark side Jedi, if you're a Sith, you get the hindrance selfless, because all you think about is yourself. Selfish, because all you think about is yourself. And if you're a Jedi, you take selfless, because all you think about is helping others. And that perfectly captures the light and the dark side. So you don't even need setting rules for some of that stuff. You just need really good hindrances or edges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trapping.
Some people just want to make a mechanic where you award points and then at some point you tip over. No, it's just role play. You decided to play like a Sith. You get selfless. Selfish.
This is why the Fallout one is so good. It's all about flavor. It's not about trying to get everything mechanically exactly the same.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And just like Paris said, trappings, those two hindrances, you wouldn't even need separate hindrances. Those could just be trappings for heroic and mean. So, bam, there you go. Two trappings and you've got Star Wars.
Bingo.
Yeah. But here's another trapping that I added to his post. I said, use the Force. That's the Elon edge. It's just that simple. So.
Yeah. That's a great idea. What is Star Wars, by the way?
Jesus Christ.
with Captain Spock.
Oh, that one. The one with Gandalf and Frodo.
Yep. Yeah, that's the one.
I like those films. I like those films, man, by J.K. Rowling.
Before the contact info here, just want to tell people that I'll be on Manuel's show next week. We're recording tomorrow, so I'll be on there blabbing some more, singing sweet lullabies. If you need to fall asleep, that'll be perfect. No, obviously, here's hoping it's great. I think it's going to be great. Manuel's a great interviewer, so I'm looking forward to that. Talking about wise guys.
I like his show very much, and I would like to say, if any of our listeners don't go and watch that, you're dead to me. Don't ever listen again. All right?
Oh, that is so nice. Thank you.
Has he interviewed that guy that made Aliens and Rednecks? Has he done that, or?
You know what? Actually, no. And I could speak for hours about that. I think that entire adventure is around 9 or 10 pages long. But the thing is, it's like people have been analysing Shakespeare for many hundreds of years. I don't know about hundreds, but the thing is about that is that Aliens versus Rednecks is very similar. It's not a nuances. First time you play it, you get a lot of layers. Second time, even more layers. So yeah, if you want to invite me on the show now on air, Manuel.
You know what? I actually want to now. Yeah.
No, I've lost my nerve. Right, okay, okay, let's wrap up the show. So, if you want to contact us, you can do so. We've got an email address. It's this hit new way of exchanging mail without having to use paper, and you can do that at thewilddie@gmail.com. Also, we're on Google+, Facebook, YouTube, all of that stuff at The Wild Die Podcast. And we're on the Nerds International community if you want to mingle with us. Now, I wouldn't advise it, though. And we're on Twitter at The Wild Die. Of course, if you like what we do and would like to donate to the show, we are on Patreon, which is patreon.com/The Wild Die. At this point, of course, I would like to thank the Patreons with the following jingle.
Sean Richard, Jason Connolly, J. Raz Alan Bray, Mr. Stag, Conrad Erasmus Neubert, Corey Dersham, Pure Mongrel, Sophia, Rob Tau, CJ Stott, Bubbles, Peter Adams, Gil Dashard, John Peterson, yeah, here I go, yes, 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 yes. Get your boys on marchable right there on the spot like Lunchables, cause boys like you trying to take the biscuit, trying to bash me up while you're betting on Ripkit.
All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed the show. It was a bit all over the place, but I think we had some big, I wouldn't say fights, but we certainly disagreed, and disagreeing, especially with Gary, is always fun. Right, Gary?
He needs to be
No. He's not taking the bait.
I found myself agreeing with Gary. I'm not sure how that sits with me.
After the show, you'll be in the corner with a blanket crying.
In the fetal position.
What have I done? All right. This is Eric saying, grab your sword by the balls.
And this is Harrison saying, jewel the skies.
This is Manuel saying, rule the setting rule, don't let the setting rule rule you.
I had to think about that for a second. That's pretty good. Paris, you got anything you want to add before we rock this bad boy out?
No. No, just again, thanks for having me on. I don't know why you keep bringing me back, but thank you.
Right, this is Paris saying, I agree with Gary, because he's the greatest. That's what you say. Right, this is Gary saying, keep your pants on, keep it fun. Thanks, everyone. We're out.
The Wild Die Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of their respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Die Podcast.